Good morning, all, and thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you are all staying as healthy and well as possible. My name is Courtney Cintron, Ingenuity's Partner Engagement Specialist, and I am also joined here today by Nicole Upton, Ingenuity's Director of Partnerships and Professional Learning. So thank you again for joining us for our third trauma-informed care training this summer, applying trauma-informed care principles in arts education. If you are interested in viewing the first two trainings, you can find them on Ingenuity's YouTube channel. So all three sessions have been presented in collaboration with the Illinois ACEs Response Collaborative and facilitated by policy analyst Madison Hammett. And today's training is taking the form of a panel, and you will hear shortly from a couple of arts organizations that incorporate trauma-informed principles into the work that they do so that you can gain a better understanding of what trauma-informed principles look like in practice. And following the panel, we'll also have time for a Q&A. So to provide some further context on why we're hosting these trainings, during these past 6 months, we have all seen the very palpable and complex impact that COVID-19, the ongoing violence against Black and Brown communities, and the economic downturn is having on our communities, our organizations, our schools, and students. And as a means to mitigate this impact, through the Arts Ed Response Collective, Ingenuity convened arts education stakeholders from across the sector to begin to address the emerging challenges for schools, students, and organizations, as well as philanthropists, through collective impact work and stakeholder recommendations. And one of the shared sentiments and values that emerged during this process was to really understand how to best prepare educators for the needs of students in the coming year. And an understanding that this cumulative national trauma and injustice are also interwoven with the arts sector's collective responsibility to critically examine the role that we play in creating or maintaining systems that drive inequity. So one of the universal recommendations that emerged from these conversations was an embrace and commitment to trauma-informed care and an equity mindset in our teaching, practice, and work. So these three trainings presented with the Illinois ACEs Response Collaborative are a starting point in this process, and we'll continue to bring you more voices and trainings on the topic throughout the year so that we can really begin to think about sustaining this work. So to help support a sustained approach, we are also currently in the process of working with 3 trauma-informed care organizations, including ACEs Response Collaborative, to build out a robust professional learning program and resources specifically for trauma-informed care and SEL in arts education. So the program will be aimed at providing sector-wide assistance and capacity building to both arts organizations and individuals in understanding, implementing, and advancing trauma-informed care principles and social emotional learning competencies into organizational and programmatic practice so that we can meet students, schools, and communities where they are right now. So more to come on this. You can look for programming updates on Ingenuity's website, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date. We'll also be releasing a quarterly catalog this year, and in the first quarter, you can anticipate several discipline-specific workshops on remote learning adaptations for curriculum. So look out for those updates soon. So once again, today's panel, whom Madison will introduce to you very shortly, will bring together arts educators who are using trauma-informed principles and socially just frameworks in the arts. Panelists will discuss how trauma-informed practice and resilience building informs their programming, the results they have seen in students and communities, and how audience members may integrate these ideas into their own work. And then we'll open up the floor for questions once again. So just a couple of housekeepings before we get started here. If you haven't already, please be sure to rename yourself and include your pronouns and your organization's name in your title. If you have any questions during the session, please feel free to make use of the chat box. We'll be making sure to answer questions throughout, but we'll also have the Q&A at the end to answer questions. And lastly, please note that we are recording this session, but we will exclude the discussion at the end from the recording. Okay, so joining us today as today's facilitator is Madison Hammett, policy analyst at the Illinois ACEs Response Collaborative. And the collaborative is a broad range of multi-sector stakeholders committed to expanding the understanding of trauma and adverse childhood experiences and their impact on the health and well-being of children, families, communities, and systems. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Madison Hammett to get us started and introduce the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Courtney. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. If this is your third time with me, thank you for sticking with me this past month or so. And if this is your first time, welcome. So I have the honor, and I am super excited to be leading this panel with three amazing artists, all of whom are going to be able to talk about how trauma-informed principles and social justice framework have influenced the work they do, whether it be as educators or practitioners or artists themselves, and how you as an audience might be able to take some of these ideas and integrate them into your own work, but also hopefully you will walk away from this thinking about the things you already do and seeing, you know, similar patterns or similar language, similar ideas. And so I am going to introduce our panel, and then I am going to do a quick note about language and how things are gonna go from here. And then we are actually going to open with a video from one of our panelists who is an artist, and Isabel has provided a piece of art that we're going to set the stage with, so get your creative juices flowing. And then we will launch right into our panel. So without further ado, to introduce our panelists, the first of which is Luis Crespo, who is the Director of Youth Programming at Collaboraction. He is also a company member there and has worked with After School Matters for 17 years and been a teaching artist in Chicago for over 12. He uses theater, creative writing, and the arts to inspire and motivate hundreds of young men and women to find, amplify, and share their voice while creating original works for the stage. He's worked with the Association House of Chicago, Center for Community Arts Partnership, Artists and Mentorship, American Theater Company's American Mosaic. There's quite a list here, Luis. You're so impressive. Memory Ensemble, Changing Worlds, Northside Learning Center, Shy Arts, and Bridge After School programs. We are also joined by Lauren Milburn. Lauren is a dance and movement therapist, a healing arts advocate, and a Schweitzer Fellow for Life. She completed her dance and movement therapy and counseling master's at Columbia College Chicago with a participatory action research thesis project exploring relational movement practices for social change. Y'all are an excellent exercise for my diction today. Lauren developed Arts and Belonging in partnership with Refugee and Immigrant Community Services to provide trauma-informed creative arts youth programming. Arts and Belonging facilitated both collaborative and individualized arts exploration focused on emotional regulation, self-esteem, and community belonging for refugee and immigrant students. In addition to her community work, Lauren is employed at Resilience, offering trauma therapy and dance movement therapy to survivors of sexual violence. Her trauma-informed counseling approach empowers creative process and integrates oh my goodness. You want to help me out here, Lauren?
Polyvagal.
Polyvagal. See, we're all learning things today, including how to pronounce the word polyvagal. Theory, harm reduction, and culture. And then finally, last but certainly not least, Isabel Bravo, who is a student with Collaboraction After School Matters program in Chicago and a recent graduate of Harold Washington College. Congratulations, Isabel. Isabel has kindly provided not only her expertise here on the panel, but also examples of the work that she has done with Collaboraction, which we are going to open with as we get started with the panel. Thank you to all three of our panelists. Thank you to everyone for watching me struggle through pronouncing things right there. And we will go ahead and get started now. So very quickly, I say this before any presentation on trauma, any panel I do on trauma, you know, we will be potentially discussing things like adverse childhood experiences, traumatic experiences, both interpersonal, systemic, structural. And so I really want to encourage all audience members and panelists to take care of themselves and, you know, pay attention to what your body is telling you. If you need to step away at any moment, if you need, you know, clarification or content warnings or anything that we can help to make this learning experience better for you, please don't hesitate to reach out in the chat box. If you have to step away and miss any of the panel, like Courtney said, this is being recorded, but you are also free to reach out to me afterwards, and I am more than happy to provide any additional information or resources for you. I also wanted to just do a quick note on language. So here at the Collaborative, we use the phrases trauma-informed and resilience. These are what we use because they're the most commonly used in a lot of literature, but they are certainly not the only type of language that you might hear when you are talking about these types of programmings. You might hear socially just, you might hear resilience building or thriving, or all sorts of different languages that resonate better with certain communities or just individuals, certain organizations. So I want to encourage you to think about that, but as both a learner, but also a practitioner. You know, if maybe some of the phrases here don't resonate with you, that's okay. And you might have heard something different that works better. That's absolutely fine. But we here at the Collaborative use trauma-informed and resilience to talk about this type of programming. So that's just what I'm going to be using throughout the panel and our other programming. So I wanna, before we get into that panel and before we get into our discussions, I wanna open with a piece of art that was provided to us from Isabel. It's an amazing song and video that she created. And I wanna share this just to sort of set the stage, not only for the art that we're gonna be talking about and the artists we're gonna be talking to, but also to sort of get you as the audience, get your ideas flowing and think about, you know, am I already doing this sort of work? Is this already something that I've been participating in and just not calling it trauma-informed? And also, you know, to show off Isabel's skills, because I think this is just a great piece and I'm so excited to share it. So hopefully you should all see a video right now. And I know it should go without saying, but as we are in tech mode for the rest of the foreseeable future, thank you in advance for your patience with any technical difficulties we might have. But I want to share this video of Isabel's work here for us.
I'm made of paper, I wrinkle and crease. Everyone I meet can see my lines. I'm made of paper, I rip and I fall. I know I gotta straighten up. I told you I'm not strong enough for this. I am paper thin. You don't know it, but I'm showing. I am paper thin. I can't help it, it's just who I am. I am paper thin. Shelter me from the rain. I'm made of glass, I fall and I crash. Hold me tight, but I still disappear. I'm made of glass, see right through me. I know I gotta toughen up. I told you I'm not strong enough for this. I am paper thin. You don't know it, but I'm showing. I am paper thin. I can't help it, it's just who I am. I am paper thin. Shelter me from the rain. I'm made of sand, I'm falling behind. Hold me tight, but I still disappear. I'm made of sand, I do what I can. I'm trying to collect myself. I told you I'm not strong enough for this. I am paper thin. You don't know it, but I'm showing. I am paper thin. I can't help it. It's just who I am. I am paper thin. Shelter me from the rain.
I just wanted to open with that, and lots of applause for Isabel, and just to show up not only her talents, but also to show this work in action and the amazing work that's being done. So thank you, Isabel, for your work and for letting us open with that. And so I'm gonna get us started now. And Luis, if I can start with you, since we started with Isabel and Collaboraction's work, can you tell us a little bit about the work that Collaboration does and how y'all have integrated, or what is the role of social justice and trauma in that work?
Well, welcome. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone out there. Hola, ¿cómo están? Thank you also to Isabel for sharing that wonderful, wonderful video and piece of work. At Collaboraction, one thing that we have an awesome privilege of providing is a platform for people from the community, whether that is in the community on the north side or throughout the city. We offer a platform for artists and communities to share their work. And by nature of a lot of what they're speaking about, it is social justice. It's all in the realm of social justice. A lot of what they're speaking to, a lot of the issues they're talking about are issues and traumas that they've been dealing with, that they're finding ways to use art to express it. And Collaboration does a great job of providing different types of festivals and opportunities so different artists can submit their work and get an opportunity to get their work showcased and get nice production value behind that. So for us, it's important that we are opening our doors up to everyone and anyone who really has something to say. And then it's our job to provide them with a beautiful production value to help support whatever that may be.
And Lauren, I'll ask the same question of you, with the acknowledgement that you have worn two hats, both as an educator and as a clinician. So I'm hoping you can answer that for your education role and the work you did with that, but also then how your therapeutic role might also inform it as well, and vice versa.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. I also just wanted to acknowledge the work that Isabel provided for us. I feel like that was such a beautiful opening for this conversation that is really about finding creative pathways towards identity and expression. So my work that I'm mainly talking about today is this program that I developed called Arts and Belonging. And it was to meet a community need with the Refugee and Immigrant Community Services program. They were already running an after-school program to support refugee and immigrant youth in completing their homework, as well as finding spaces for support. And my role became to also open that up for some creative arts programming. We were finding that the students needed a little bit of extra support with regulating emotions, and then also just navigating the stressors of coming to a new country, particularly at a time when coming to this country has been incredibly hostile because of the kind of rhetoric that is being spread by the current administration, as well as the larger masses of the following there. So part of the role of having space for creative expression was to allow the students to be able to process that in ways that were culturally competent and trauma informed, in terms that the students were allowed to really lead the process themselves and be able to share what they were feeling without necessarily having to talk about it. Oftentimes the students that I was working with also were learning English at this time. So talking about how they were feeling wasn't always accessible. So using the arts was a way that we could meet each other in this nonverbal space and develop relationships. How that has informed my clinical work, I work with survivors of sexual violence, and it's very interesting to note how trauma, even when it's happening for very different reasons, it can sometimes look very similar on a body-based level. Oftentimes trauma is processed through the body, and the brain isn't necessarily able to formulate words around the experience. So similarly in my clinical work, I find that whenever we have the opportunity to express the experiences through a nonverbal, more creative or body-based form of expression, there is more space to make meaning of the experience and be able to integrate it into a future.
Thank you. And somewhat of a similar question, but from your perspective as a student. So when you joined Collaboraction, was your motivation more, you were just looking for an arts programming, or were you looking for a social justice programming that also had art? Can you talk a little bit about your journey to how you came to Collaboraction?
Sure. And once again, thank you, Lauren. Thank you all for your share my work, and it always makes me happy to know, that it's received, and something that is relatable, right? And on that note, so before Collaboraction, my only experience with theater was telling other people's stories, right? And so I really didn't know what to expect when I showed up to Collaboraction. I just knew that I wanted to do something creative, and really what I found was a creative space with mentors that really guided us as youth and learning how to tell our own stories and learning all the ways that you could do that, and then the impact of it, right? Because I think sometimes as youth, we are used to being like, oh, these are just like kid problems, these are just kid experiences, like it's just teenage stuff. But then, when you're really given that space to learn how to tell your story and communicate that to an audience, and then have that feeling of reception, of being understood and being heard, that's what led me to continue doing that kind of work. Because I did try to go back to the traditional theater sense, and I just felt like I didn't connect the same way with it. I felt like there was for me personally, a greater impact in working with others and telling their stories and listening and really working on these deep-rooted issues that we have in our society and the many ways that they manifest, like Lauren had mentioned. So for me, I think that's what, it was a surprise to find out that that's what the space was like, and then that's what really continued to push me in that direction. And then also independently as an artist, in keeping that same theme and continuing to have these discussions in the artwork that I create.
Louise, to that note of Isabel coming and kind of discovering, oh, this is what Collaboraction is about. Can you talk a little bit about how Collaboraction became that? Was trauma informed, and was social justice, were these ideas something that you had always at Collaboraction built your work upon, like that is what we are always going to do that? Was it an evolving process? Did you start out maybe dipping your toes into it, but then went full blown? Or can you talk a little bit more about just like how you actually came to decide to merge these two ideas of art and action together?
Well, about 6 or 7 years ago, Collaboraction started um, a, a series of theater pieces, an anthology called Crime Scene, which focused on stories that occurred in the city of Chicago, and really was talking about root causes of how certain different levels of unrest occur in our city and why, and the impact that it has. And from there, after that show, I was able to join the company, and it was a perfect opportunity to merge some of the youth programming ideas and the social justice, using social justice issues as a way to give young people a platform to speak on some of these issues that they were dealing with, that really had a lot of connections to what we were doing in the crime scene theater performances. So we started doing youth programming that really focused on giving young people a place to build ensemble, to discover some of the passions that they have, whether that was theater, writing, music. And it evolved into something that innately, by nature of what we're doing, it is, we are providing social justice, giving a space, a safe space for young people to come in and to explore and to really shape and find out what it is that they'd like to talk about, and how they like to represent themselves, providing a place where people could come in and talk about things that are really impacting them and the city. That is a beautiful thing that manifests just by providing space and bringing young people together and giving them a good scaffolding of a curriculum where they can basically talk about issues that they find very strongly are impacting them, and then they can have the freedom to explore that any way they'd like. And the evolution of this social justice aspect into Collaboraction is something that has been innately in the theater. Once I've joined the company as youth programmer, it's something that I've always ingrained in my programming, where just by having the young people coming together and sharing their work and mentoring one another and inspiring each other, that in itself is providing them with a space to work through certain traumas or certain stresses or certain mental stresses that you don't necessarily have the outlet for when you're at home, or when you are at school, or when you're with your buddies. So if you have a place that you can come to help develop and nurture that, it is great. And then you could exponentially sort of spread that out. So your presence, or the youth's presence and their artist sort of energy is spreading to their buddies when they're hanging out with them, or at school when they're there, or when they're at home alone. Someone like Isabel will take the time to put together a stop motion animation video for her original song that she wrote, dealing with just stress. So long long answer to your question. um, Collaboration has been involved with providing theater for the city for many years. I think this social justice turn and this trauma infused sharing stories that are, again, just by the nature of what they are speaking to trauma and speaking to healing and speaking to connection. That really came into form about 7 years ago at Collaboration, starting with our crime scene anthology, and it snowballed from there. and really the realization that really all of what we're doing is in some way um, uh, working towards social justice in a positive sense. So sorry for my long-winded answer, but
No, not at all.
that's what
Yeah,
I got
thank
for
you.
sure.
No, thank you so much. Long-winded answers are excellent, you know. And Lauren, I you know, asked the same question of you with the acknowledgement, like you created this program with trauma-informed principles in mind. You've said, you know, you were addressing a need in a population. So I'm wondering if you can talk about, you know, since this has always explicitly been a part of the work that you were doing, how you got that ball kind of rolling, you know, was it difficult when you were, for instance, pitching this idea to folks, you know, saying like, I'm going to do trauma-informed, you know, arts therapy, and they were like, what does that mean? Or I'm, you know, arts programming is, you know, even if we don't talk about trauma, maybe I'm going to be taking care of trauma because they're going to be doing motion or painting or something that's helping. And so can you talk a little bit about the origins of the program and the reception to that idea?
Yes. I guess I just want to acknowledge what Luis was already talking about, because I think the program that was co-created of Arts and Belonging was centered on the same kind of principle of creating space and holding space for individuals to feel like their experiences are finally at the center of the conversation, where in other shared spaces, maybe it's more of a marginalized identity or an experience that isn't talked about or even acknowledged. Specifically, I think what I was noticing, so I was already volunteering with the community services for refugee and immigrants. And at the after school program, we were noticing that students would come and they would just like immediately pull out their homework and just like want to start working on it. But through that process, there was almost like a dissociation from their emotions, because their desire to just work was coming from a desire to want to continue to fit in and learn and be able to catch up with their peers. Oftentimes, students in CPS don't get very much arts education. So another role of this program was to fill that need as well, and to really allow the students to start to recognize that they have artistic and creative capacities that can be, like Luis was saying, a scaffold to all of the other skills that they have as well. So part of another piece of this programming was that we really wanted to set up a space that could feel really predictable, a space that the students could come in and almost like allow themselves to relax maybe the higher productivity that they were being asked to show up with at school and maybe even in their home spaces, to really allow them to start to connect with their bodies and their minds in a way that felt more authentic to what they were going through, which, I mean, coming to this country right now is not an easy process. So to build that, there was a lot of actually checking in with the students first. So our process was really to talk with the students and listen to what they were asking for and what they were needing, which was play and time for connection with each other, and even to learn each other's names, because like I said, when they were coming in just to like sit down, there was no interrelationship, and the program just seemed like an extension of school rather than a space that they could call their own, and that space where they could feel safe enough to process a little bit deeper what was going on. So I think I think that is where I'll end that answer for now.
Thank you. Yeah. And Isabel, I want to ask you somewhat, building off of what both Luis and Lauren have said, so about creating that space and, maybe the students didn't come there explicitly for mental health care. That's something that has come up not only here with some questions we've gotten at trainings at Ingenuity, but it comes up in all sorts of trainings and panels I've done where people will say, well, that's not what people are here for, so I don't want them to, be uncomfortable or that sort of thing. So Isabel, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, how you feel that space has been created for you at Collaboraction through the art and the merging of these ideas that Luis was talking about.
So I think that's a really good point. I think Luis and I can both agree that as I have, grown through the program and eventually interned as well and been in a different role where I'm helping him to enforce, what this environment is and, keep the morale and things like that. I think it's the one thing that was really important that I think really made this space is usually at the beginning of the program, a lot of the kids were like, my mom just signed me up for this. I'm just kind of here. She said I had to do something. I like to sing sometimes. So she said, come here. Well, so back to reference to the crime scene anthology piece, a practice that we used to do was read through the script as a group and really just set the stage for a conversation around this is the kind of content we're going to be working with. What are your thoughts? What's your experiences? Any just reaction, just really setting the stage for people to understand that right now you are heard, you will continue to be heard throughout the program. This shared like respectability of like, I share my truth and I'm vulnerable with you so that you can feel comfortable in sharing your truth and being vulnerable with us. And this space is really just for you guys. I feel like that was one of the main things that I felt and stepping into that space is like, this space is for us. It is for, sharing and things like that. And it's been really so amazing to watch then as an intern on the flip side of, being like, oh, I'm concerned that these kids will sometimes take these topics and then be just really cruel with each other or bully each other or use them, to pick on each other's vulnerabilities sometimes, but really just seeing the way that they continue to care for each other has been like also inspiring, because it's like I feel like every generation is kind of getting better and better as you have these conversations more frequently and more access to these conversations like through media. And so then just the trust of being like, this space is for you guys to be honest, to be vulnerable, and we will give you that same respect. You are heard here, you're valued here. Your story is valued here. It's not easy. There's definitely some rough patches that come along with that and conversations that need to be had. But I feel like as long as you set the stage for, if something goes bad, we will sit down and we will talk about it to make sure that we continue to move forward from it and that it becomes a learning experience rather than a traumatic experience that may happen. For example, if you're at school and the same thing happens and the teachers don't have time to really sit down and address these things like you would in a space like this. So I hope that does answer the question.
And I think you've also touched on, for those in the audience who were at particularly our first training when we talked about trauma-informed care and trauma-informed principles, one of the big pieces of that is collaboration and shared learning and shared power. And that's something that comes up a lot in these organizations that are working towards that sort of programming or trying to change their HR policies or anything like that, is this idea of this is a safe space to share. So it sounds like that is what was created for you. And if I can build on that with another question, Isabel, I think another thing that comes up a lot with organizations in all sorts of sectors, and I've already touched on this a little bit, is this fear that by talking about hard things or making space for hard things, that you are potentially opening people up to be hurt again or to hurt each other. So I'm wondering, Isabel, if you can talk as someone who has been on both sides of it with Collaboraction, as both a recipient, as a student, and then as an intern and taking care of younger kids, like how has that been for you? And the receiving services and receiving, you know, education and it opening up those harder things, like is that a fear that should be had, or is that something that, you know, is addressed through the talking that you were talking about?
So I think that fear is definitely real. I feel like personally, as having been a teen in that program, I think that's always, I mean, first of all, that's always a fear, and it's also very real, right? We're all human, and we don't have these programmed robotic responses like, okay, now it's a safe space, and now we're going to start talking about trauma, but it's going to be a good time. Like, sometimes it just won't be a good time, and that's just that's where the aspect of embracing that fear comes into play, because you have to realize that, I think, from the jump, and then mentally prepare yourself for, if I'm a facilitator of a conversation of this, you know, of this variety, of this topic, that I have to be prepared with the humanity of it, right? I have to be prepared. Somebody might break down. It's very possible. Like, that's very real. And I have to, as someone's facilitating, you know, this conversation or being a part of it, I have to already, you know, go into it being like, if that happens, this is how we take care of each other. This is how we, you know, address it and, you know, go with it in the moment. Because I think, you know, for example, like comparing it to like sometimes classroom experiences, I don't know, as a college student, I would say also, for example, there have been times that I'm like, man, I'm just so stressed out in this class, I need a moment or something. But when you're an adult, you kind of have that autonomy over how, okay, I need to step out for a second. But for example, when you're like a teenager in high school, then it's like, it becomes a fight, it becomes a battle of, well, why do you need that space? Or what are you gonna do? You know, this kind of thing. And so I think, you know, when you already prepare for that and say, this could go badly, somebody could need some space, this is how we set the boundaries at the beginning. If you need space, let us know. We will give you that control over how you need to handle yourself in that moment, the space that you need, so that you can take care of yourself. And in that, we are helping you take care of you, right? It's not going to be no one can cry here. If somebody cries, it's going to become uncomfortable. It's going to become, you know, this and that. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Madison,
thank you so much.
Could I speak to that really quickly?
Yes, please.
So that's a very important topic to speak to. A lot of these things that young people are going through, or artists may be going through before they go into a space, some of that's already living in them. It's not necessarily like that space is the thing that's evoking that, you know? It's usually just, again, a platform for some of that stuff to get refined and explored. Safe space is a very strong word. It's a very strong set of words there. And programming and for your organizations to provide truthful, meaningful programming is by providing that safe space and providing that structure at the beginning, so that when things break down, so that when things get like intense, and when you get young people who are profound and beautiful and smarter than I am, you know, when they come up with some intense subject matter that in the moment, I don't know how to take it. I need to take a breath and say, thank you for sharing that. That was intense. Holy cow. You know, and those discussions then maybe end up becoming some sort of creative work, or if anything, it's opened an opportunity for that one person who never says anything in the circle to finally say, man, I had a bad day at school today. Or I don't feel like I'm gonna stick around the space for a little longer today. If you guys want to chill with me a little longer, that happens because the safe space is established. And how do you establish that? By your own structure, whatever that is, whatever your medium is, whether it's dance, art, painting, theater, creative writing, having that structure so you can talk about things that are traumatic. We're all dealing with an intense trauma right now. We've been hit as a world, as a society, by two realms of trauma that we are unescapable. We're all supposed to be stuck in our homes. We're afraid of coughing, hearing a cough, or getting sick and getting someone else sick. And there's an intense amount of unrest, and antennas are up and glasses are off and the blinders are taken away. And the issues of racial and sexist unrest in our societies are impossible to ignore. So we're all hit with all of these traumatic things. So it is good to have a place that is safe. So that safe space, it is a term to be used not lightly, because it is important. And that opening moment when those young people come in, that first second when they walk into that space, it's already cultivating whatever that nurturing that you want is already cultivating. Where that person's coming in early doing their work or just chilling out eating their lunch, that second person comes in, another conversation comes up. And what's wonderful is, again, these topics and these conversations, they're having them. The young folks are having them all the time. The trick and the artistry is, how do you provide an unburdened space where they can explore and they can take risks and they can make mistakes, just like all of us can make mistakes, you know? Sometimes we, as instructors, or I'm projecting here, it's like, well, I forgot where I was going with anything. I'm going to shut up. I'll just leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. Safe space is an important thing. Take time in really cultivating what that is for yourself. And chances are, you already got a safe space. Because you know what? Even in a bad space, these conversations are going to happen, you know? Like even in a space where it may not be nurturing the right sort of energy, these things are still happening, you know? So you have a great and tremendous responsibility and power as instructors, educators, and organizers to really create a safe space for these young cats, because they're going to be creating great stuff regardless. It's just awesome when you give them that platform and you get to witness it.
Thank you so much. That's such a great, like, all-encompassing, I think, idea too, because it's taking something that might feel very complicated or intimidating perhaps, and just boiling it down to like safe space, giving people that space to talk and feel accepted and, you know, listened to. And I think that's you said you talked for a long time, but I thought it was just such an excellent example of that. And Lauren, I want to kind of build off that then too with you, as someone who exists in both realms, like we've talked about, like you've been the educator and the clinician. And so, you know, in creating that space, you know, for a lot of people, I think might hear that and say, like, you know, I want to do that, but I have half an hour with these kids after school to do their violin lessons with them, or I only have an hour to do a dance lesson. Can you talk about any ways that you have, through either of your positions, been able to create that space and still address the needs and the reason why, the practical reason why someone might be in front of you because they need a dance lesson, or they need to do their therapy, or whatever they've come to you explicitly for? So how do you create that space while still getting things done, so to speak?
I love this question. So for one, I'll just elaborate and say that I think trust goes both ways. So when we enter into relationship, we're not just creating a space for trust for the individual to trust the facilitator, but we're also allowing ourselves to trust the person that we're working with, that they'll be able to tell us what they need in any given time. But we have to remember that we aren't mind readers. And in order for us to know what someone needs, we need to ask. So I think the way that people can start to cultivate these safe spaces is really checking in, not just checking in with yourself before the session and making sure that you're in a space where you even have capacity to be able to check in with someone else, but also then creating that time. And yeah, time is something that I would also like to talk a little bit about. But creating that time for the person who's walking in to meet with you, to really ask, and how are you? And what is it that you're coming here with? Because we have to acknowledge that the person that we're working with isn't just in the space with us. They're also bringing with them these experiences from being in their family systems, being in the school systems, being where we're watching media, and not to mention social media can be a really stressful place for youth these days. So, and on the piece of time, I think that is a product of capitalism that loves us to just like only be focused on results and only be focused on product. Whereas when we're working with a creative arts framework, inherently in that is spaciousness of time, to notice that we're actually not really too concerned about the product, but we are concerned with the process, with what it is that it takes to even be engaging with your own creativity in this moment. And that takes time, and that requires us to sometimes slow down. I think especially when we're in programs that are really focused on measurements and like making sure that like we're meeting benchmarks for different grant funding. And this was something that came up when I was working with refugee and immigrant community services. They were really concerned because their grant funders were asking them to demonstrate how their students' grades have gone up. And my approach was, well, we can't necessarily force these students to get better grades unless we're really cultivating the space and the time for them to have a better understanding of what their emotions are and what their skills and creativity experiences are. Because inherently when we do create that space for emotional regulation, from what we know about the nervous system and the brain, if the nervous system is feeling more regulated and in less of that fight, flight, or freeze response, there is actually more capacity for the brain to engage with logical and rational thinking that's necessary for education. So my approach has really been to slow down, meet the person where they are, and make a plan with them in mind, and asking them, well, what is it that you do need? Whether that's a space to scream, whether that's a space to cry, if that's a space to really just not say anything and be in silence for a moment because the whole world is overwhelming. That's the work, and that's really the place to begin. And I know that it doesn't necessarily like reach those benchmarks that the other pressures are coming from, but what you'll notice is the more that you do meet the person in this initial place where they are, those benchmarks are just gonna happen. So it requires trust.
Thank you so much.
What's up? I'd like to mention one thing, if that's okay, before
Yeah, of course.
before the moment passes. And this is directly to all those educators out there working with young people. You are beautiful. You are wonderful. It is not easy. It is not easy. Sometimes I used to think, you know, I got to work through burnout. I got to work through the burnout. The burnout's going to be there. I got to be there no matter what, no matter how I'm feeling. And then I came to realize, you know, burnout is trauma. You know, it can be a form of trauma that you are working through so you get to the next moment. All right. And sometimes we do need to check in with ourselves. We need to take in and take a breath and recognize that you already, by the nature of being in this panel, in this Q&A, you are already doing good. All righty. You are wonderful. What you're doing is not easy. Make sure that you do check in with yourself, that you do take care of yourself, and you find those moments to take care of yourself. And it isn't a perfect world. There may be moments when right before you have a session or something where you have to do that's important and you have your own stuff that is triggering you, and you have to be there for someone or some people, and you may not be feeling it inside, but somehow you need to work through it so you can be there for the people that you need to be there for. And chances are the click will happen and you'll be able to transition out of your own traumatic sort of self-absorbed moment so you can be there. But let's be real, it's not easy. What you're doing is not easy, and you should be applauded. And keep working, keep doing it. And these ideas, self-care, checking in, trust, safe spaces, those are all powerful words that keep in mind. You know, they're easy to learn, sometimes difficult to master, but they're all tangible things you can have. But remember, you're doing hard work. Sometimes it's intense, you know, and sometimes you don't get the opportunity to breathe before you get the next moment of intense. Is undoubtedly changing and making the world a better place. So continue on.
That is actually such a perfect lead into the next question. I think you must have known what I was going to ask you ahead of time, but this is for all three of you. You know, we are, as Louise mentioned, as Lauren has mentioned, you know, we are in a time now where our workspaces, our lives look very different than they did 6 months ago, a year ago, and we are operating under an enormous, you know, national, international trauma right now with COVID. And then here in the United States in particular, but also in other countries, we are seeing, you know, rising unrest. We are seeing political ideologies emerging that are dangerous to groups of people. And so I'm wondering, you know, you've already touched on this a lot, Louise, but I'm wondering if any of the three of you can talk more about how your organization's, you know, trauma-informed isn't just for the people that we serve, it is also for us as the people who are working there, the people who are facilitating and teaching. And so I'm wondering if you can talk, you know, about how either your organization is doing it with explicitly with what's happening now in the world, or just in general, how employees and staff and volunteers, interns, how they can be supported in being teachers, in being artists, and providing this work. So that's to any of the three of you who would like to go.
I'll respond very quickly. Collaboraction does, I believe, is fairly internally, we're a small staff, and one thing has been love and care. Within internally, I know I've gotten a lot of support. So there's a lot of support and a lot of understanding and a lot of room to breathe and a lot of conversations So that way we are checking in with one another, and nothing's perfect. No one's always in good spirits and good moods, you know. Certain things there's friction and there are difficulties that arise in any organization where wonderful things are coming about. But at the heart of it, I know that I'm being taken care of, and that I can go on and do what I need to do, which can be very stressful at times. Um, and knowing that if I need the breath, or if I need to talk to someone, or if I need to communicate with staff internally, that I really do have that I have that place to go, you know. So I feel taken care of on that end. So I feel the organization has done a good job of doing its best to take care of its staff, which I can't speak for everyone, you know what I mean? But me internally, I know I'm able to do my job, and I'm able to feel like I'm in a good place as well. And hopefully that translates to the folks that we're working with also.
Lauren, I'm wondering if you can also speak to that, maybe not necessarily in relation to COVID or what's going on right now, but it's actually what with what Luis closed with, what we're doing with each other translates into how we take care of the people that we're working with. And so, you know, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about how that comes to working with each other as staff members.
Absolutely. So I think it's really important to first examine your organization's mission statement and see if those same principles are being applied amongst your staff, as well as in the output that you're giving to whatever community you're working with. What's helped me is to kind of think about an organization as the microcosm of what it is we're hoping to generate on that macro scale. So how, even in our interpersonal relationships, are we living the values that the organization is hoping to promote in the world? So how I've sort of seen that happen in the work with arts and belonging. Really what was happening was a lot of the staff members or other volunteers that were working with the program started recognizing that we needed space for our own consultation and own time for processing. So we started setting that up. And I think what was really important about that was that we started noticing not only did we have experiences of vicarious trauma, but there was, because of that space, we were also able to talk about the experiences of vicarious resilience, which is really that we're noticing that seeing the students and participants working in their creative ways and like finding different sensory tools that really did help them to feel more regulated, we were finding that inspired something within us as well. So I think again, it's a bi-directional feedback loop. And this in polyvagal theory, which is the framework that I work within in my clinical work, is an experience of co-regulation, where if our nervous system is in a calm and regulated place, in a place that can be adapting to whatever given adversities or circumstances come our way, if we're able to, like Luis was talking about, like if we're able to quickly find a way back into, okay, well, how can I be present now, despite what else is going on in the larger scheme of things, then our regulated nervous system, our adaptive nervous system can be then the space for someone else to start to like, oh, this person is like taking a moment to breathe. Oh, like, and then just naturally the other person might take that moment to breathe themselves. I have an anecdote, if that's helpful. We were doing a weaving project where we took two little branches and some yarn, and we were sort of like wrapping the yarn around. And what we found was the students were just so in it. And then very quickly, because all of the students were involved in the creative process and feeling like they had the sensory feedback of like having this predictable repetition of this movement, the staff and the volunteers started making their own. And then it was just this collective experience of all of us breathing, talking, chatting. I put on some music, and we were all regulating together in this moment. And I think that those are really the spaces that are so important to cultivate, because it's great for the students to recognize, oh, it's okay that my educator is doing something for themselves too. And like we can break down that idea of like that perfect or that ideal vision of what a person is, because we're all allowed to be not okay, and making our way in that in between as well.
And y'all are so excellent at setting up the next stage of questions for me, because in that spirit of creating space for teachers and for the folks that are here, I want to invite those of y'all who are listening who have questions or who would like to discuss anything with Lauren or Lewis or Isabel, like you've heard so far, please, feel free to raise your hand, take yourself off mute, or if you feel more comfortable putting it into the chat box. Courtney and I are both on there, so please feel free to ask any questions right now. And I'm going to open that space up for everyone. And if we need to, as Lauren said, sit in silence for a second, that is also fine as well. I'll also say too that Isabel has very kindly prepared more songs for us too. So I will use that as a carrot here as well for folks.
I actually had a question. I was kind of curious if we could speak on the role of agency and choice in our programs. This was something that we didn't quite touch on, but it is another really important aspect of trauma-informed care. How is it that maybe Collaboraction is creating space for participants to make choices and to feel empowered to trust their own process?
Well, that's what Collaboraction is about. Youth programming, all of the stuff that's developed by the youth, it goes through a process, a brainstorming process that usually is structured and scaffolded to where there's a lot of discussion. People bring up what they'd like to talk about. Generally, it is, sometimes it's just a matter of not really even talking about a specific subject, or like we don't go in being like, let's talk about COVID, let's talk about masks. Generally, it's like, let's do a writing activity about flowers. Who knows? That's generic example. But once you start exploring your idea of flowers and what that means to you, who knows where your subconscious and your mind may take you. And for some reason, flowers may make a connection to someone else with oppression in some way, and they could connect oppression with a flower and come up with a beautiful poem that then we're like, holy cow, that was wonderful. Let's find a way to to lead you in that direction so you can continue to nurture whatever that piece is. So we offer opportunity, and sometimes that's the trick. How do you just open the, how do you, really, you just kind of, you supply something and the floodgates usually open, and then from there the youth take over, or the artists take over as far as what they like to create. But for the most part, it's uh, offering a tidbit that really opens up the Pandora's box, so to speak, where whatever people are feeling, then you get to write about it, you talk about it, then you write about it a little bit more, then you talk about it a little bit more, then you find someone who has a similar idea, you merge those ideas together, maybe you make a scene, maybe you create a melody or a song. There are different, there are a myriad different directions it can go in, which is really, really fantastic and phenomenal to watch, because it's always surprising. It's always surprising, because even though a lot of these activities and exercises that in the theater world or the sort of creative writing world, a lot of them are very universal, and you just kind of switch them up a little bit. You do your own variation of it, and they manifest in many, many, many different beautiful ways that are very surprising and shocking, and almost always profound. And it's eye-opening, and very, it's awesome. It's awesome to hear a piece that a young person wrote that is as good as any piece of poetry you may find in a dusty library shelf or in a staticky radio station. Um, the young people of the city and the world really do some profound stuff. So really just offering them sometimes a prompt, and that really gets them to generate their own material, and it goes in really so many different directions. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
So helpful too, I think, for a myriad of different disciplines too to hear as well. So, and we have a couple of questions that have come in. One is from Stephanie, who asks if you can speak to some of the practices that you all have adapted or modified for your remote arts interaction, teaching, facilitation. And I throw that out to all three of you.
All right, I'll keep this really brief because I talk too much. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun trying to find ways of adapting these things that work on stage in a circle and trying to adapt on a virtual world. Some of it doesn't work, all right? Like unison stuff, call and response, not as good, all right? But mirroring work, shape shifting, there's a lot of stuff that you can do and adapt. And checking in still works. You're not in a circle, but now you're in a grid. So there are a lot of things that translate wonderfully, and if anything, it gives us as artists and educators an opportunity to revolutionize and to get better, you know, like, and to increase our tricks of our trade.
Open it up to Lauren and Isabel as well.
Yeah, so the program of Arts and Belonging, we did have to shift in March, and I think what was really exciting about that shift was because we were thinking a lot about accessibility, and I think accessibility is a trauma-informed principle that often doesn't really get named too much. And this is the idea that we're working with tools that are available to anyone. So this was a big shift for us, because a lot of the work that we had been doing was very arts-based, that required a lot of different like paintbrushes or materials that refugee and immigrant families don't always have access to. So what we were doing instead was we started taking a look at, well, what is there in the home? Can we make something out of recyclable materials, or can we ask the participants to go outside and find some natural materials that are just available, like a leaf or maybe some sticks, and how can we then use those materials to build creative process together? And then the other piece that I would love to speak on is that we all already have access to our bodies. So a lot of the work that we've been doing virtually is body-based expressions and different, working with like different stretches or even creating movements as a way to connect with each other. I'm sure Collaboraction also uses a similar idea of like that energy ball. That was really fun to try to practice throwing the energy across space and time through the internet.
That's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. So it also was another opportunity to think creatively and to adapt. And I think I will say there were a lot of accessibility issues in terms of technology. Thankfully, PS was providing Chromebooks, so we were able to get some of the families on our video chat calls. However, there were a couple families we could not. And I think that that's another really important thing for us to start to think about as we develop these virtual programmings. Who is able to access this program, and what are the materials that are needed in order to increase those numbers? So something to think about too as we continue on with this time.
I also want to ask Isabel, as a creator, how has this changed? You know, I know you said you were also the intern, but then as someone who is the recipient of some of these programs, how has that been?
Sorry, I can't exactly speak to the issue the same way Lauren and Luis can, but I think an interesting experience for me as a creator, as a artist, as a content creator, if you will, is using social media a lot more for the things that I include in my the themes that I discuss and whatnot. I feel like I feel like social media is very accessible to young people. You know, I think we're even getting to a generation where kids have an Instagram, but they don't have an email, you know? And it has really been affirming to me, feeling like I can use the tools that I've learned from these spaces that I've had access of. Speaking back to Lauren on accessibility, I've had the access to a lot of spaces and a lot of resources and a lot of tools and language that I feel like are really important. We all know our experiences, but having the language and the tools to discuss them and the space to do so is something that not a lot of us have access to, right? And so I feel like taking this opportunity, you know, while the world is all, you know, very confusing and messy, and being able to use those tools that I've learned on how to recenter and how to really evaluate our own state of being and incorporating that into my art and then sharing it with other people, I feel has been very helpful. I think it's calming to feel stressed out, but then see somebody else who's taking it with strides, but not in a way that seems like, you know, this sense of perfection, but someone who says, you know, well, okay, this is what's on right now, but this is also how I feel about it, and I'm sharing that with you, and how I'm breaking down, you know, my emotions and what I'm feeling, and how I'm just processing. I think a lot of the times, you know, we don't know exactly what processes work best for us unless you've had the space to do so. And so then just being able to kind of provide and share, like, this is how I'm processing, you know, hopefully you can resonate, hopefully you, that maybe that works for you, or, you know, we can, I know Instagram has this really great feature where you can ask your audience or the people who follow you check-in questions where you can share with people. And so it's been a nice, you know, tool to use for, you know, how's everyone doing today? And then they can answer honestly, because sometimes you can set it to anonymous so that people can just say, listen, I don't know what's going on right now. I'm so scared. I don't know what, you know, my college isn't working out and this and that and that. And you can, you know, either, you know, respond directly to that person or use it as an opportunity to share anonymously with everyone else. Like, you're not feeling alone in this, right? I know we're all isolated and we're all at home, and with social media, I know especially there's this pressure to only share these cut clean experiences, and I'm only going to share the, you know, aesthetic picture of my latte, things like that. but really using it as a tool to reconnect with our humanity, especially during this time, I think for me has been very useful.
That was actually a great example. Lewis and I were talking about this before the panel about how we don't understand TikTok. Maybe just me, but using the tools that are given to us, even if they're not the school provided laptops, or we can't get a hold of people through email. You've found the way you can get a hold of people, and so I think that's a really good reminder that different people have different tools in front of them. So we are coming up on 5 minutes till close, and I want to ask one last favor of our panelists, and that is of Isabel, because like I said, Isabel did prepare multiple songs for us, and so I was hoping that we might be able to close with one more piece of Isabel's art, and end our panel on a high note with an example of not only her great work, but also of how this plays in real life with artists and how we can see it as an actionable thing for us. So Isabel, if you are ready, I would love for you to close us out.
Yes, for sure. This is, let's see, this is a song I wrote maybe like a year ago. This was a direct, a lot of the times I write my music as direct responses to things I go through or ways of healing processes. And so I think this is one of those songs where it's also very directly clear, like what the situation is and things like that. And also just some affirmations, right? Good morning, it's 8, and I haven't ate in a week. I'm chewing you out and you're shutting me up, and I guess I haven't had enough of you tonight. You've just crossed the line again. But if you can forget it, I'll leave it behind. You know what they say, out of sight, out of mind. But it's 9 at night, I'll make it so 12 a.m. I feel like I might call him to make amends, 'cause I know that I'm so blind. The way he seeps through these cracks in my mind. I don't think I was made to be broken, and maybe I am in the moment. But I'll boast in my weakness, and now I'm sure that maybe you aren't you anymore. You aren't you anymore. Anymore. It's almost 12, and I've lost myself to us. If I just did better, this wouldn't suck. I mean, haven't you ever heard of tough love? And it's true. And I felt so alone. But I guess that I'm crazy, it's all in my head. Or maybe that's just the story I'm fed. But it's 9 at night, only make it to 12 a.m. I feel like I might call him to make amends, 'cause I know that I'm so blind. The way he seeps through these cracks in my mind. I don't think I was made to be broken, and maybe I am in the moment. But I'll boast in my weakness. Now I'm sure that maybe you aren't you anymore. Aren't you anymore? Anymore. Anymore. Thank you guys. That was called Love.
That was amazing, Isabel. Thank you so much. I just want to close out. Also, just amazing gratitude, Isabel, for all of that. And thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing your insights, your approaches to this work. It's invaluable to the community. And thank you to everyone out there for viewing and taking time to think about how you might incorporate trauma-informed principles into your own work, or how you might already be doing so. And creating safe space, trust, and kind of some of the other things that we highlighted here today. And thank you to Madison and the Illinois ACEs Response Collaborative for your moderation and also facilitating these sessions. You'll be able to find this recorded session on our Ingenuity YouTube channel, so tune back in if you want to check it out or share it with friends. And we hope to see you all very soon. Thank you so much.